Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this Apex Office Hours. Let's get started. My name is John Snyders. I'm one of the developers that created Interactive Grid. The other two main developers are Anthony Rayner and Patrick Wolf. It is a big component, and it's hard to think of anyone on the team that hasn't contributed to it in some way, especially Karsten, Hillary, Shakib, and Christina. Interactive Grid has been available since release 5.1, more than 1.5 years ago. It has been shown in many conferences and presentations, and I hope that most people by now have had a chance to see it and try it out. Today I'm going to get into some advanced topics related to Interactive Grid. The material is targeted at people with Apex experience and at least some JavaScript. I won't be showing a lot of code or developing an app step by step, but I will make everything I demo available after the session. The main takeaway should be an understanding of the wide range of solutions that can be achieved with Interactive Grid. So all the demonstrations today will be using Apex 18.2, which just shipped last week, but I'm likely to give my own personal opinions, speculations, or hopes for the future. Here's a required safe harbor slide. Keep in mind that my statements about the future are not promises or commitments to base purchasing decisions on. So I've been a member of the Apex development team for about 6 years. You can follow me on Twitter if you like, and my blog is listed here, and it contains a number of articles on Apex and including Interactive Grid. First, I'll show what Interactive Grid provides out of the box, no code necessary. Then I'll talk about the architecture, which is important to understand in order to do advanced customization of Interactive Grid. Doing anything complex on the client side requires knowing or having a willingness to learn JavaScript and other browser technologies. I'll provide links to resources to learn about Interactive Grid. Then I will give a tour of the Interactive Grid Cookbook app to demonstrate some of the things that are possible with Interactive Grid. Then I'll answer some questions. Type your questions into the chat and David will gather them. So I'm going to quickly create an editable interactive grid to show how easy it is to create this powerful component declaratively. I have an empty app ready to go. I'm going to use Page Designer rather than Wizards. Either way, it's very easy. Simply drag an interactive grid into a content body. I'll give it a title for the region. Then for the SQL query, something simple. As soon as you put in a query, it populates the columns over here. And I'm going to make this the employee number, which is the primary key. I'm going to make this hidden. And then specify that it's a primary key. For an editable interactive grid, you need to specify a primary key, but it's always a good idea to specify the primary key even if the grid isn't editable. It's a best practice to do it. If you had any columns that were not updatable, such as something using a case statement, then you would specify query only. And we don't have any of those. Making the grid editable is as easy as checking yes. You get some more options. We're going to leave all the defaults, but we're ready to run this page. So you can see right away there's a grid. It didn't take much to create this. It's always a good idea, as soon as you, the very first thing you do when you create an interactive grid is to give all the columns a default width. You can do that simply by dragging them, or there's a columns dialog where you can enter the width in, and then set one of the columns to sort, one or more columns, and then save those as the default saved report. Just good to get in the habit of doing that so you don't forget. So now we can see that we've already seen some of the features, being able to resize columns. You can drag columns to reorder them and select one. There's one of the nice features of Interactive Grid is having frozen columns, which you can do by choosing the freeze or unfreeze button here. Now, if there were more columns, or if we made some of these columns wider, at some point there would be a horizontal scroll bar, but these columns over here remain frozen. There's lots and lots of features of Interactive Grid. I could fill a whole session just talking about the declarative end user features, but such as filtering and sorting, aggregating, highlighting, but that's not the focus of today's session. I'm just going to do one more thing, give this column a nice name. It defaults the names based on the database column, but you can change that. And just want to point out that you can learn about all of these attributes that you can set by looking at the Help tab. It'll provide information that you need to know in order to use these declarative features. So I'll go back to run this page, and we can see that the name heading has been changed. And I just want to show that you can now edit these things, edit these and save them. And you can do as many edits as you want. And you can even delete rows or add rows, which I won't actually do. And yeah, that's basically it for the basics. As you can see, there's no programming needed. All I needed to know was how to use the page designer and a simple SQL select statement. So data grid is not a one-size-fits-all component. It is not possible to make a grid component that does everything, that meets everyone's needs or suits all use cases. Instead, we tried to make something that handles the most common use cases with no coding required, and at the same time provide the APIs and options that make advanced or uncommon things possible. There are over 100 declarative configuration options and plenty of developer or end user runtime report settings that can be used to satisfy many use cases. But you're not limited to just this. Interactive Grid can be customized in many ways, including advanced configuration, toolbar customizations. You can react to events and control the Interactive Grid. And as we'll see, there's a data model layer that can be used to read and write the underlying data. So starting in Apex 5.1, of regions got this new attribute, JavaScript initialization code. The general idea is that a widget, whether it's from Apex or a third party like Jet, may have more options than the Apex component chooses to expose as declarative attributes. By adding a JavaScript function, you can set any of the underlying widget options. The difference between this and setting an option, say, using a dynamic action, is that options are set before the widget is initialized. In almost all cases, you should choose the declarative attribute when it exists over a JavaScript option. So how do you learn to make use of these customizations? Before getting into the architecture and showing examples, here are some resources for learning how to program Interactive Grid. One of the best ways to learn is by example. The first thing you should do is install the Sample Interactive Grids app. It covers the basics, but also has a few advanced examples. You can find it in the app gallery. Just go to App Gallery, Sample Apps, And you would click on this and then click install, but you can see that I already have it installed. So another good set of examples is in the Interactive Grid Cookbook. You can get this app from my blog, but there will be a new version soon after this session, the same one that I will be demonstrating shortly. The task of learning Interactive Grid is easier now than it was when first released because we now have a documented JavaScript API reference. It still isn't complete, but it is much better. You can see there's lots of information here on the things that you need to know in order to use Interactive Grid. And I'll be talking about some of these things next. A number of people have really dug into the details of Interactive Grid and shared their knowledge with the community through blogs and presentations. Marco, Matt, and Menno are examples, and you should look them up on Twitter and check out their blogs. The Interactive Grid cheat sheet is a very good resource. This was created by Marco Gorecki. It has links to a number of blogs, including my own. And here you also find a number of quick code snippets. Finally, if you get stuck, the Apex forum is a good place to ask questions. These are the key architecture concepts that I will cover in the next few slides. This is a diagram showing the client-side modules of Interactive Grid. I'm not going to describe each box and arrow. You can read my blog, Interactive Grid, under the hood for the details. One key point is that it's not a monolithic thing, but made of many parts. In comparison, a diagram of interactive report would be one big box with just the menu widget box hanging off of it. The Interactive Grid is the top-level widget that coordinates all the rest. The first step in knowing how to accomplish a customization is knowing which widgets or modules you need to work with. For example, if you want to modify the Actions menu, you need to know something about the menu widget and/or actions. A modular design lends itself to reuse, which I will demonstrate. So all of the dialogues that we use inside of Interactive Grid are actually using the grid widget and/or the record view widget internally. So this view over here, we can add more filters and so on. This is a grid view, the same as a grid view that we see here. And on this side is a record view widget, which is the same as single row view. So we've gotten a lot of use out of the components that we've built. I expect these parts to find more uses in the future. For example, in the future, an enhanced pop-up LOV could potentially use the grid widget to show multiple columns. Another key thing to notice is that there's a separate model and view layer. Model view separation is an important concept in virtually all UI implementations. You will find it in software patterns such as model view, view model, and model view controller. The model holds the data and the view presents it. Views have access to the model to get data or change it, but the model doesn't know anything about the view. It sends notifications when the data changes, and the views listen for those and update the presentation. In this way, it is possible to have multiple views on the same model and all are kept in sync with the data. For example, the grid view and single row view are two views of the same data model. A number of the examples I'm going to show highlight this aspect of the architecture. Don't be confused by the terminology. In the database world, the term model is related to the schema or design, but in the object-oriented world, it refers to a data structure instance that holds data for a view. The next thing I want to talk about is the flyweight pattern. This refers to how we use just one input or column item, no matter how many rows there are. The items are kept in a hidden off-screen area. As the user focuses, the item is swapped in, and as the cell loses focus, it is swapped down again. This allows the grid to scale to hold many hundreds of rows without overwhelming the browser memory. And it also allows us to use any item, even ones that are too big to fit in a cell. The same page items and item plugins can be used in an interactive grid. There are just a few things that an item plugin needs to do to support being used in a column. And you can see the documentation for the apex.item.create function for details. Knowing how the interactive grid handles items makes it obvious why dynamic actions and other code can only access items as they apply to the current row being edited. This is the key to choosing to manipulate the data either with the item API or the model API. Using the model API gives you access to all the rows. Another example of how the interactive grid scales is that it only renders rows as they become visible. As the user scrolls, the view asks the model for more data to render. If the model doesn't yet have the data, it will fetch it. It is important to understand actions because Interactive Grid uses them for many operations that you might expect to be widget methods. For example, if you want to save the data, you invoke the save action. There is no save method. To insert a new row, invoke the selection add row action. The documentation lists all the interactive grid actions. So you select the widget Interactive Grid, and in its description, you'll see a list of all the actions. So there's things here like show the help dialog, stretch columns, and as you can see, there's many actions. So what is an action? An action encapsulates the state and behavior of a named operation that the user initiates via a user interface element. Examples of states are the properties label, title, icon, disabled, hide, and shortcut. I just mentioned some examples of behaviors, saving data and inserting a row. When you create your own actions, the behavior can be whatever you want. The action is just a function. For toggle or radio group actions, the get and set functions return or update the toggle or choice state. Actions can be invoked from more than one UI element. For example, a button and a menu item and a keyboard shortcut could all invoke the same action. Associating an action with a UI element, for example, a button, is as easy as using a specific CSS class and adding a data action attribute with the name of the action. When the user interacts with the UI element, the action is invoked, or for toggle or radio group actions, the toggle or choice state is updated. You don't need to create any event handlers, it's automatic. When the state of the action, such as the label, disabled, or hide property is changed, all the associated UI elements are updated. Again, this binding is automatic. It is a simple way to keep the UI in sync. I can demonstrate that now. So the reset button is a good example of this in the interactive grid. You can see that the report menu has a reset item, and these are the same thing. You can see that they share the same label and the same icon, and they're both disabled currently. If you change the sort, you've updated the report settings, and now they can be reset. And we see that now both the reset menu item and the reset button are both enabled. So this simplified the implementation of Interactive Grid, and it can simplify your apps as well if you have the same action invoked from multiple places in keyboard shortcut. Actions are the way that keyboard shortcuts are defined in Apex. There's no need to implement your own key down event handler or include third-party libraries. To learn more, consult the documentation on actions. Actions can also be used with Apex menu list templates, including the top navigation menu. I've written about actions a few times on my blog, and I hope in the future they are better integrated with Apex. The last architecture topic is about how data is exchanged between the server and client. In the beginning, servers rendered HTML pages that included data in form elements. The browser submitted the form data in a POST request, and the server processed it. After processing, it would redirect to the next page. Many web apps, including Apex, still work this way. As we will see, since Apex 5.1, it doesn't always work this way. Then came the age of Ajax. Now browsers get data from the server and send data to the server at any time without reloading the page. Many Apex components have this built in. Apex supports general Ajax with dynamic actions that execute PL SQL code. It is also supported with the apex.server.process API and an Ajax callback PL SQL process. But there are limitations. The dynamic action execute PL SQL code can only pass page items in and out. With the apex.server.process API plus the Ajax callback PL SQL process, you can pass in the X scalars and the F arrays in addition to page items. The response can be anything you want, but you must generate it on the server and process the response on the client. You can get data out and into page items on the page, but it takes manual coding, both PL SQL and JavaScript. In both cases, there is no automatic DML and no declarative validations. It is difficult to pass large amounts of data or multiple records. For example, tabular forms use the F arrays like F01, but this limited the number of columns, and you could only have one tabular form on a page. Apex uses Ajax to make pages more dynamic, for example, by refreshing a report region, but it still relies on submitting the page for most data processing. Meanwhile, other frameworks use Ajax exclusively, so-called single-page apps or JavaScript apps. The HTML page is a static shell with no data, and forms are never posted back to the server. Both ways have their pros and cons. In Apex 5.1, to support Interactive Grid, we completely reworked how Apex pages are submitted, while still having the option to mostly do it the old way. Form items and model data is serialized as JSON, chunked and sent as the p_JSON parameter in a form post request, but it is sent using Ajax. The page context from being lost when there are validation errors. On success, a new page is loaded by the browser. Also, since Apex 5.1, it is possible to send Interactive Grid models along with specific page items using Ajax. This has all the benefits of running declarative DML and validations, but without the need to submit the page and redirect. At Kscope 17, I showed this slide to introduce what an interactive grid is. Now I want to offer an alternative developer view. Interactive Grid is a declarative way to get SQL result set to the browser, present and manipulate it in arbitrary ways, and save it back to the server for declarative processing. The key thing to realize is that fetching and validating and persisting data is fully declarative as shown by the green boxes. It solves the problems just mentioned that dynamic actions and apex.server.process have. When you have complex, non-typical UI requirements, there is no getting around the need for front-end JavaScript, but there is no reason why handling the data shouldn't be declarative. Inspired by JET, some people have tried using Knockout with Apex. Knockout is a popular data binding library used by JET and many others. I have nothing against Knockout, but I don't see it fitting in with Apex. Knockout requires a handcrafted model layer written in JavaScript, and I don't see that as something that Apex developers should have to do. Also, it offers no solution to getting data to or from the server. In contrast, the Apex model offers a declarative data model layer that works with the Apex server. But what about the Interactive Grid UI? I have a page that I will show how to hide the UI and detach the model so it can be used for other things. Hopefully you can see how this has the potential of enabling progressive web apps. What's missing is generalizing this so that it is not just tied to Interactive Grid. Currently, it would not be hard to create a model region plugin, but the automatic DML process is hardwired to only work with Interactive Grid. More powerful templates than what the apex.util.apply template function currently supports would be useful in creating the dynamic custom UI. And lastly, a general two-way declarative binding to the model would round out this solution. That's enough abstract architecture. It's finally time to demonstrate some advanced interactive grids. So this is the Interactive Grid Cookbook, an app I created to provide examples of how to do interesting things with Interactive Grid. You can download it from my blog. However, don't download it just yet. Today I'm showing a new version, and I will be updating my blog with this new version in the next few days. This is version 4 of the app, and is updated for Apex 18.2. The homepage lists what's new in each version. There's also 2 very important points in bold. 1, you must first install the Sample Interactive Grids app because this app needs tables that it defines. And 2, this does not demonstrate best practices. It is up to you to use best practices as you adapt the examples for your own use. After all, it is you that must maintain your app going forward. The examples are in no particular order. They may have multiple aspects or demonstrate more than one thing. It may be hard to find what you're looking for. The best thing to do is to skim the whole app and get an idea of what it contains. I won't have time to show all the examples or how they are implemented. I'll show a few old ones, but want to focus on the new ones. I have tried to group them into general categories. Keep your eyes open for techniques that have nothing to do with Interactive Grid that could be useful in other contexts. For example, the custom pop-up plugin, extending jQuery UI tabs with add and remove methods, the splitter region template, pop-up template, and a wide content with horizontal scroll bar solution. This page is just a baseline with no customizations to use for a comparison. Each page has a notes section that describes the purpose of each example. Sometimes there are links to the Apex form thread that motivated the solution. They may have there may be version-specific notes. It typically says what the use case or problem to be solved is, what kind of customizations and where to find them. And it may list issues. The issues, they could be bugs or just ideas for the future or issues with applying the techniques. In addition to the notes section, the JavaScript code has many comments. In places where I'm using things that are not yet documented or internal or likely to change, I will flag that in the comments. This is a simple example. Someone wanted to have highlights defined, but didn't want to see the report setting area. The next few examples I put in the category of customization. This demonstrates how the style and behavior can be customized to be more like a desktop app. You can see it looks very different from the interactive grid we've seen before. The bulk of the customizations are in adding a few CSS rules to change the style. This includes the hover checkbox style. The row actions column has been removed and replaced with the context menu. Advanced attributes are used to turn off the column width stretching. We got feedback from a number of people that they didn't like the automatic width stretching. In Apex 5.1.1, we added advanced configuration options to turn it off. In 18.1, we added the stretch column widths as an end user report setting, so the user could decide whether or not to stretch columns. This example forces no stretch, taking away the user option. The context menu is the same menu as the one in the header of the row actions column. It is simply assigned to the grid widget context menu option. The interactive grid requires that all rows have the same height, but you can use a CS rule to change the height for all rows. The main thing I want to point out about this example is that starting in 18.2, you no longer need to create a custom CSS rule to set the column heading height when the text wraps to a new line. The wrapping could be because of a BR tag or because you override the header label whitespace property. So to demonstrate this, the employee name column contains an explicit BR tag. If I hide this column, then you see that the height adjusted, and this one will wrap if it's too narrow, and you can see that it automatically adjusts the height. This next example doesn't look like an interactive grid. It looks like a universal theme cards region. You don't realize there's anything special until you keep scrolling and scrolling and notice that more cards are being added as you scroll. You get the benefits of the card. You get the benefits of the card UI and the benefits of interactive grid for scrolling and filtering and searching. This is using a toolbar widget that has this is a custom toolbar, not the interactive grid toolbar, and it has a few different options for changing the card styles as well as invoking the filter dialog. The next category of examples is about overcoming limitations. One limitation is that the rich text editor isn't supported as one of the column types in Interactive Grid. This is because the CK editor uses an iframe, and moving an iframe in the DOM causes its source document to be reevaluated, which breaks the CK editor. The page shows how to get around that limitation by using the custom pop-up plugin that is part of this app. Here you can see that the notes column has a lot of text, and this is using a rich text editor inside of a dialog that was popped up in order to edit using rich text. You can see, so now what I typed in is in here, and you can use bold or whatever. When it's saved, it removes all the HTML, so you don't see a bunch of tags in here. It just shows a truncated version of the text. Now this custom pop-up was updated for 18.2, and it's also used here for choosing a manager. In this case, the pop-up is showing an interactive grid. to allow you to choose a manager. It's also been updated and enhanced in 18.2 to support multiple inputs and outputs. When you pop up a salary, you'll see that it shows a dialog where you can type in a new salary, but also the commission as a percentage of the salary. And when you click OK, it's actually updating 2 columns. And you can extend that to any number of outputs. This custom pop-up plugin is a good example of an item plugin that works as both a page item and a column item. So if you're looking to create a custom, a page item that works with Interactive Grid, this is a good example to look at. So many people have complained about the difficulty of accessing the horizontal scroll bar when the report is wide and has many rows. So if I make some of these columns wider, so now there's a horizontal scroll bar. I can't get to these columns. I have to scroll to the bottom of the report. In this case, it's not too much scrolling, but the reports could be very long, and then move the horizontal scroll bar, then scroll back up. This is an issue that applies to Interactive Report, Interactive Grid, and any region that is both wide and tall. It is not a limitation of any of these regions, but simply the way universal theme responsive pages are designed to work. It favors vertical scrolling and the ability to respond to small screen sizes over having regions that are wider than the window. Responsive design is generally a good thing, but if you have a report with 50 columns and hundreds of rows, it is quite reasonable to expect that it will be used on a desktop display. Universal Theme doesn't have a page template that is optimized for wide regions. This page shows a solution where the page never scrolls, but the regions do. And because the regions are fixed size and scroll, the horizontal scroll bar will always be visible. And we can see that if I move the window, resize this window, that this region resizes itself so that it completely fits in this page. I think this is currently the best solution when you have a wide region or multiple regions that scroll independently. This example is more of an optimization than a workaround. This page shows how to make interactive grids very lazy. Normally, setting the lazy load attribute to yes means to load data using Ajax as soon as the page loads. But what is the point of loading data when a region is in a tab that is not currently visible? Notice that as I click on a tab, you'll see a spinner indicating that data is being fetched the first time the tab is opened. Some of these regions are load so quick that you don't see the spinner, but we saw the spinner each time, just the first time that the tab was opened. This allows you to have many grid regions on a page without the overhead of fetching data for tabs that the user may never visit. An interactive grid set to lazy load will not load any data until it is visible. This works automatically in collapsible regions, and since 18.2, it works in inline dialogues, but tabs and region display selector need a little extra help, and this page shows you how to do it. I hope in the future that other Apex regions are lazy, like Interactive Grid is. The next category of examples manipulate the data, manipulate the model layer. This example shows how the model API can be used to update a number of values in the model and how the view is automatically updated to reflect the model changes. It demonstrates adding a custom action and updating the selection action menu. So you can select any number of rows and then choose the selection menu. And this is the new, this is the custom action and menu item that was added to increase salary. It pops up a dialog where you can enter in a percentage that you want to increase it by. It's also an example of client-side validation. We can see that there's a maximum of 10% that you can increase the salary by. If we look at the salary, we'll see when we click OK, they were all updated. And then you can go ahead and save those changes if you like. This example is showing dynamically on the client side updating a total. If we change one of these numbers, we'll see as soon as we leave this cell that the total is updated. It doesn't matter if you change to a different page. The values are going to be updated, and it's taking into consideration all of the data in the model, not just what's showing on the current page. A couple of things to keep in mind if you're doing client-side calculations. The client may not have all the data. This example uses the fetch all model method to make sure all the data is loaded so that it can calculate the correct total. But use this with caution so you don't cause too much data to be loaded in the browser. Another thing to remember is that the Oracle and JavaScript do math slightly differently. And the server should never rely on any client calculations. This final category demonstrates the advantage of model view separation. So this is an example of having a separate model and view layers. There's a single interactive grid, but it only shows a few columns. The details area shows all of the data from the interactive grid in a normal Apex form. The values shown in the details form comes from the interactive grid model. So you have two views of the same data. As you change selections, you'll see that no new data needs to be fetched from the server because it's already in the model. You can make a change in one place, and it'll be reflected in the other as soon as you leave that. As soon as you leave that field, you can see that the manager was updated. If you make a change here, then it gets updated over here. This provides the benefits of an interactive grid for things like filtering and sorting, and the benefits of a form with custom layout to leave room for extra large fields like notes, and without having to pop up a dialog. You can edit in either place, as I've shown. And if you delete a row, then it just grays out the form over here. Specific logic was added to do multiple editing, and any changes you make would be applied to all the selected people. If we select just one or the other, we see that they have the salary that we just entered. This is also a demonstration. This also demonstrates setting up a fixed size page and using the splitter widget. And the splitter widget's even used over here. So here's another example that doesn't look anything like an interactive grid. Someone on the forums asked how to create a page that can edit multiple records, each in its own tab. This is something that is not easy for Apex to do because a page has a fixed set of regions and essentially one form. What I have here allows us to create, open up many tabs. And then you can switch between tabs. You can even reorder the tabs, and you can change the salary and edit multiple of them, and then save them. You can open the notes to see the notes for this example, and that opens as a tab. You can close tabs. If you make a change and then decide to close that tab, you'll be prompted so you don't lose your change. You can say OK or cancel. So what's going on here? First, there's a jQuery UI tabs widget that is used and extended to support adding and removing tabs. This was much easier than trying to get the Apex tabs widget, the one that's used by Region Display Selector, to support add and remove. There's a single hidden form region that serves as a template for all the tabs. When a new tab is added, the DOM of the form is cloned and modified. There's a hidden interactive grid region that is lazy loaded. Remember, invisible grids don't load any data. The model is detached from the view so that it can be used without ever updating the hidden grid. This gives us the declarative fetching and saving of data that I talked about before. Simple data binding is implemented between the tab forms and the model. It is surprising how little code this requires. This is another example of a page that resizes to fit the window. I mentioned that it's surprising little code to show the data binding. I think I'll just quickly show that.
And then, John, just to give you a heads up, we have a number of questions. So after this one,
that was my last example, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of stuff, but there's a fair amount of code in getting the tabs, working and all of that stuff. But this is the simple binding code here. That's it. That's what's involved in automatically updating the model and the view and keeping them in sync for this particular example. It's called simple binding because sure, something in production would probably have more cases to handle. But that was sufficient for this demo. And yeah, that's all the examples I have to show. There's plenty more in the cookbook. And keep an eye out for the new version that I'll have in a few days.
Great, thank you, John.
So should I go through the questions that were asked previously, or?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so let's see. This is about how to sort data in the detail view. This is a known bug. It's actually, I would say, one of the more embarrassing bugs in that, to be honest, without being able to support the details view, they're not very useful. And this applies to the icon view as well. There isn't a way to sort them. I don't know of a workaround for it. It's one of the higher priority bugs. I can't say exactly when it will be fixed, but it is still a bug in 18. The next is about, do you plan to support rich text in Interactive Grid? So there's no specific plan right now. It's on our list of things. We certainly know about it. And today you saw me show how it can be worked around. I think if you take a look at that example, you may find that it's reasonable enough and reasonable enough to put in production. So take a look at that. It's kind of a long question, but it's really getting at the advanced JavaScript options versus declarative attributes, and kind of what's our future plan. I think that in general, the advanced JavaScript sections are a good idea, because I think that, whether it's third party or our own widgets, there may be things that just don't, they're too advanced or just don't make sense to make a declarative attribute. However, that said, we have gotten a lot of feedback from Interactive Grid that maybe we went too far in making too many things advanced. We've already brought, the one thing that we made declarative was the stretching of column width, and we're looking at making some other things declarative attributes. But I think that the having this kind of safety net of advanced JavaScript for truly advanced options is a reasonable thing to have going forward. And there's this trade-off between simple UI for finding a large number of attributes. It's kind of complicated. There's a trade-off. I think in Page Designer we've improved things by being able to search through the attributes now. We had tried dividing things up into advanced and not advanced, and that really didn't work out. The search, I think, works a lot better, but still having too many attributes, I think, can make things confusing. So, but we will try to add more declarative attributes for Interactive Grid. Hopefully that answers that question. So, David, what other questions do you have?
So the next question is actually, I'm going to throw at you, is from Eric Olson about the IG always displays at 100% width, which doesn't work very well if you have only a few columns. Is there any easy way to give an IG a max width?
I think that you can, so it's really CSS that says, and this kind of applies to all the columns. All the columns will try to be the width of the page, but it's a rule to set the width explicitly. You might also try playing around with the grid layout of the page, maybe putting an empty region next to it, or just simply saying that this region only spans a certain number of columns. Because keep in mind that there is a layout grid built into Universal Theme that lets you put things side by side and control the number of columns that a region or a page item spans. So I believe it's possible.
Okay. So there's a question here from Ahmed about, is there a way to get some of a column that can change on runtime without saving the interactive grid or page? He uses JavaScript, but is there any declarative way to do it without using JavaScript?
Not sure I understood that question. He's looking to change a value on the client side?
So basically, yes. So if you think about when you do a group and you do an interactive report terms, you do a group by, for example, and you might do a aggregation. And do we have a similar thing in interactive grids, given that you can also update, it can be an editable interactive grid?
No, right now that's not possible without, it's possible, but you have to write some JavaScript to do it. And it's something that we've talked about and considered, but there's no definite plan for it. So right now it remains a custom thing that you would have to do.
Okay.
So maybe the best thing would be maybe to just refresh the grid and let the server recalculate things.
Thank you for that. And the next one's is, hang on a minute, is from Naveen. And can we display blob images in an interactive grid?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that, like authoritatively, like I've actually done it. If the image can be displayed, by the URL an image tag, then you can use the option of having HTML markup to mark that up. But specifically dealing with blobs, I'm not so sure that it can.
Okay, not a problem. The next question I have is from Scott Wesley with regard to lazy loading. As you scroll down the data, would you be able to keep track of which records have been displayed for auditing purposes?
Interesting. Never thought of that before.
So what we'll do is we'll put that in we will get back to you, Scott, on our thoughts on that one, because of the fact it's a bit hard to answer that one on the fly.
Yeah, so I would like to know more about that use case. Maybe bring that up on the forums, and I can reply there.
Okay. Anthony's actually just put in the chat about a German blog post regarding blob columns. So you might have to use Google Translate on it. And Naveen actually just asked another one here, which is a nice lowball one for you, is about how to change from tabular forms to interactive grids.
Okay, I don't think there's a automatic migration, and some of the things that are, well, first let me say that I was, having only worked in Apex, 6 years now, I was never a big tabular forms person. I kind of got here, I don't know, a little late for that. Anyways, I think a big change in understanding is that with tabular forms, you use the server-side Apex_item API, and you kind of thought in those terms of, I'm going to render a particular kind of input element in this column. And that's not what you do with interactive grids. You just declaratively say what type of item this is. I think other than that, it's fairly straightforward. The processing on the back end, I think, can be a little bit simpler if you're going to a straightforward table. It will do the persisting of changes automatically and declaratively, but you can write the same, in essence, you can write PL/SQL code as well to save the data. One thing to keep in mind is there's a feature that was in tabular forms that is not implemented in Interactive Grid yet, and that is all the selected items. You used to be able, in tabular forms, you could see which things were selected regardless of whether or not there were changes or inserts or deletes. You just got a list of what was selected, and that is not the case with Interactive Grid. You just get the changes, things deleted or updated or inserted.
Great, thank you. And then I've got another question here from Naveen regarding column filters for icons are not working. Can that be done, I suppose, through JavaScript is the question.
Column filters for icons, are you talking about in grid view or icon view? Is this a grid view question or icon view question?
Grid view, I would assume, because they're talking about doing a filter.
Oh, right. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how to handle, because, are you filtering on the underlying data, or are you filtering on the markup that you generate? That's kind of the underlying issue there. And okay. I haven't thought too much about how to handle that.
So again, Naveen, if you can actually ask that question on the forums, then
also, sorry, Pat, that may be something Patrick has some ideas about as well.
Yep. So if you can ask that on the forum, then we will answer it there, and then everyone can see the responses. And just relating to the going from tabular forms to interactive grids, when you're doing an upgrade application, sorry, when you're upgrading an application, if you go into that particular application, go to utilities and then upgrade application, you can see your tabular forms and you can decide whether you want to upgrade them or not. If they're stock standard tabular forms, then moving them across to interactive grid makes a lot of sense. If you've got a lot of customizations, then it doesn't make as much sense, and you should probably create a new region for yourself and then look at the functionality that you need to replicate from the tabular form, if that makes sense to you. Okay, so I think that wraps up our questions, and we're right on the top of the hour. So thank you very much, John, for all of your information today, and thank you everyone for participating in today's Apex Office Hours. And we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. So don't forget to subscribe to our Office Hours so you can get reminders of the upcoming sessions that we have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.